Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, I'm Audley Stevenson, and you've got it locked into the Audacious Living Podcast. This, hands down, is the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer, and I appreciate you taking some time out of your day and joining us here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping you live your best audacious life ever. As always, I encourage you to connect with us through our social media channels. We love to stay connected and stay social. And you can find us under the handle, The Audacious Pod, on Instagram and Twitter. And then if you head over to Facebook and type in The Audacious Living Podcast, you'll find us there as well. And if you happen to be watching the podcast, of course, the podcast is available in audio and video form. If you happen to be watching on our YouTube channel, all you've got to do is click the notification bell down below and you'll immediately stay connected and receive those instant notifications. So again, I'd encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, share, tell a friend. We love great comments on your favorite, whether it's Apple or Spotify, 5-star ratings. All these sorts of things are integral in helping the podcast grow and develop, and I'd encourage you to support us in any way you can. Now, my guest on today's episode of the podcast is Akshay Nanavati, and he really is a remarkable individual who provides a fantastic perspective on dealing with fear, something that we all know very well, we all know about. And Akshay is no different. And after serving in the Iraq War, Akshay returned home and found himself suffering from a number of issues such as addiction, post-traumatic stress, depression, alcoholism. He was on the brink of suicide, and it was at that point that Akshay discovered a unique way to find gifts into what, oftentimes we categorize negative emotions, things such as fear, stress, and anxiety. And by doing so, they would no longer hold him back. This led him to Fearvana, and its intent is to help people develop a positive relationship to not just fear and suffering, but struggle and pain of any kind. And falling in love with those things allows you to use them as an access point to bliss. His book, his website, his entire movement is under this Fearvana brand. Akshay simply wants people to know that developing a relationship to fear and suffering is an important life skill to master. And he left us with so many juicy gems, and I think you'll really appreciate the things he has to say. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Akshay. Enjoy. We'll see where this ends up. So if you're okay with that,
awesome. We
can just kind of get going. How's that sound?
That sounds perfect. The conversations I love the most.
Me too. I'm in the same boat. In the same boat. So Akshay, I really appreciate you taking some time and sitting down and talking. I know we've made a couple of attempts, but we're here. We're gonna forget the past. That's all that matters.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we're going to talk about Fearvana, which is obviously a title of your book, as well as a movement, or if you will, that you've spearheaded and created. I wonder if we could start with the conversation about kind of defining what Fearvana is for those that aren't fully in tune or up to what we're talking about here.
So Fearvana is the idea that these two seemingly contradictory ideas, right? Fear and nirvana, that often people perceive as the opposites, that fear is something bad and nirvana is bliss, it's enlightenment itself. And Fearvana is the idea that they're not in fact opposites, that fear is not the antithesis of nirvana, but fear is the access point to it. Right. That fear and nirvana can coexist. So the fundamental essence of everything I do with Fearvana, from the book to the movement to the business or the brand around it, is to help people develop positive relationship to not just fear, but to suffering and struggle and pain of any kind, and to fall in love with it and use it as an access point to bliss. Because through a lot of life experience, a lot of research, I've learned that these forces like fear, stress, anxiety, that often demonized, often framed as something negative, but they're not negative. They are whatever we make them to be. And Fearvana is about helping people turn their fears, turn their struggles into bliss and even enlightenment.
Because of that relationship that people have with fear, they're going to struggle with what you're saying right now. They're going to say, what are you talking about? You've got to be kidding me. There's no way I can embrace this. Have you engaged in sort of conversation? When you engage in those conversations, rather, what has that looked like? That sort of, because you're almost flipping a switch in terms of how you define it, right?
Sure. Yeah. Because the conventional wisdom, you'll hear the quote unquote experts, everybody will say ththings like, don't be scared, be fearless, overcome your fears. We even hear that so often. Yes. And just the other day, I heard somebody say that there's two ways to think, like, you can choose from fear or choose from love. And all of these ways of thinking, they frame fear as something bad. Now, fear is uncomfortable. It is, of course, uncomfortable. It's not a pleasant feeling. It doesn't feel inherently good. Neither does stress, neither does anxiety. The nature of suffering is that it sucks. It's painful, so all of these things, but because they're uncomfortable, it doesn't mean they're bad. Right. They can be, the greatest things in life, like in my own life, the greatest things all accomplishments come from having faced my fears and moved through them. I had to engage my fears. In fact, just 3 weeks ago, I was climbing in Alaska. I was an attempt to climb the tallest mountain in the North America. And we didn't get to the summit because of brutal storms on the mountain. Right. But even before setting foot on the mountain, I was terrified, and understandably terrified. Like, I don't do the things I do, from climbing mountains to skiing across ice caps to running ultra marathons to building a business to writing a book. Even writing a book on fear was terrifying. Sure. I was scared that, what would people think? Is it going to be garbage? Are people going to hate it? Am I going to get that dreaded 1-star review on Amazon? All that kind of stuff. You're scared about it, but I understand. I engage the fear. I use the fear and say, okay, this fear is very normal. Whenever you take any kind of risk, not just risk of life and death, but any kind of risk, like putting a book out there is a risk. Yes. There's a fear that comes with it. That's a normal human response to risk. Yeah. It's what we do with it that matters. And so when I face that fear, so for example, writing the book, I engage the fear. Okay, what am I scared of? Why am I scared? What's the worst case scenario? Yep. How do I prepare for the scenario? And one of my mantras is, fear propels you to prepare. Okay. When you engage the fear, you can prepare. Like, because I was scared of writing a bad book, I studied from authors like Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup for the Soul author, one of the most popular nonfiction book series of all time. I studied, how do you write a better book? And because I was terrified of writing a bad book, I must have trashed like 100,000 words worth of work. It's not exaggerating, tons of months of work. Yep. But I wrote something that now I'm truly proud of, and one that was a book that was worthy of the Dalai Lama writing a foreword for it, and now it's making a difference in people's lives. So my fear drove me to do something better.
Yeah. I love the point around the fact that we're embracing the fear and accepting it as a normal human feeling. And quite frankly, I truly believe that if you're about to do something and you feel that fear, then you're probably pointed in the right direction of where you kind of should be going. But I think where it gets really problematic, so you're talking about fear doesn't allow you to do, but the things that you don't do as well. Like, you either hold yourself back because of fear, or you take another path because of fear. And both are dangerous and detrimental to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things I always like to say, the question to ask when you're at these crossroads, whichever the crossroads may be, the question to ask is not which passion do I want to follow, but which struggle am I willing to endure? See, at any crossroads, I work a job I hate, or I quit a job to start a business. I stay in this relationship, or I leave and I be single. Any crossroads. I can choose to climb this mountain or not. I'm running this marathon or not do it. There's going to be a struggle. You're going to deal with the mental, physical, spiritual struggle in some way. The question is, which struggle are you willing to endure? And that's why it's so valuable to ask that question, because you're going to fall to the level of struggle you're willing to endure. You might say, I know I'm really passionate about both these things. And your passion is a great thing. Yes. No doubt about it. Yep. But it's easy to love life, and it's easy to pursue a path when things are good. Yes. Anybody can do that. Sure, but when things get hard, when the storms hit, when life punches you in the face, what are you going to do then? And that's why the question to ask is, what struggle are you willing to endure? Both paths could be scary. Both paths will involve struggle, will involve stress. Which one are you willing to endure? Like the path I've chosen now, There's suffering in it, but I love it. I seek this kind of suffering.
Mm. I also love the way you're incorporating struggle in what we're talking about here, struggle and suffering, because fear is one thing, right? The fear isn't always real, but the struggle and suffering very well can be a real thing. So they do work hand in hand in one another very much so, don't they?
Very much, like the way I kind of frame it is that like suffering is the umbrella, and under it, there's the discomfort of you name it. There's all these challenging emotions like fear, guilt, struggle, stress, anxiety, right? They're under the umbrella of suffering, and everybody's going to feel them in different ways and what shows up as we pursue our path and as we navigate the journey of life. And that's why sort of at a meta level, it's navigating whatever the struggle may be, whatever the suffering may be, whether it be fear, whether it be stress, whether it be anxiety. Gotcha. If you can face and fall in love with that experience of horrible discomfort, physical, mental, and spiritual,
right?
Then that's why like it's the most important skill to master. The most important skill to master in life is to develop that positive relationship with fear and suffering at a meta level. Because when you can do that, because ultimately, like, what is it we seek in life? We seek, at the core of it, when you dig deep behind the why of anything we do, we seek to be happy or fulfilled, right. whatever word you want to use, happiness, fulfillment, inner peace, right? We seek that. And the way to do that is if you fall in love with suffering, then no matter what happens in life, whether life punches you in the face or whether you're seeking a worthy challenge, you're going to be able to smile in the face of suffering. And inevitably, you'll live a more blissful life because you'll be able to smile in the highs and smile in the lows. Right. That's why that's the essence of what I'm trying to do here with Fearvana, is to help people do that. And that's not inherently easy. I mean, the nature of suffering is that it's hard. Yes. So it's not an easy thing to do. And like you said, most people, it counteracts everything they've been taught to believe about the nature of it.
Right. Interesting as you talk about the challenge and seek out challenges, because you do that. You're climbing mountains. Is it help me understand sort of, where the drive is to look for these challenges? Is
sure.
it support sort of the Fearvana brand, or is there more to it than that? Or what, help me understand?
Yeah, so it was birthed when I joined the Marines. So before that, as we speak, I'm currently here in India. I was born in India to a good family, great life. Like we weren't extremely wealthy early on. Now they're doing much better, but we certainly weren't poor. Definitely couldn't have asked for more. Great life, right? Mm-hmm. And we moved around from India to Singapore to Austin. Soon after moving to Austin, I got very heavily into drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
Very dark place. I used to cut myself, burn myself, just in this very destructive world. And I lost 2 friends to drug addiction and was heading down that path myself. So I was very lost. And one day when I was in the midst of this, I watched the movie Black Hawk Down. Have you seen the movie?
Yeah.
Very powerful movie. It's a war movie based on a true story.
Yes.
So watching that movie, it triggered something in me. Watching the courage of men giving up their lives, sacrificing their lives for another human being. What kind of human being would do that? What kind of courage does it take to do that? And it made me question this very worthless, selfish, meaningless, purposeless existence I was living. And almost overnight, I stopped doing drugs and I wanted to go serve in an institution where the good of the group matters more than the good of the individual.
Right.
In the Marines, we suffer together as one. Right. And you become one. There's a oneness that forms from that. So almost overnight, stopped doing drugs. It took me about 1.5 years to join because I have a blood disorder that 2 doctors told me would kill me in boot camp. So I had to get all these medical waivers. And then I joined the Marines. And the Marines is when I started to find the beauty in suffering and the beauty in fear. Because obviously, Marine Corps boot camp is hard. Right. Marine Corps training is hard. You suffer, you go through pain. There's a lot of fear. And going through that, I realized how awesome it was. I mean, I loved it and I thrived in it. I graduated infantry school as the honor graduate of my platoon, so I loved it. And after coming out of that, I started to look for other ways to confront my fears, to face them, to challenge myself. And nature became my playground. I went rock climbing, cave diving, skydiving, mountain climbing. I mean, you name it, like any outdoor sport you could almost think of as I started diving headfirst into all of them. And it's not that I was fearless. Like when I was a kid, I was terrified of roller coasters.
Right.
So, and I was terrified of Ferris wheels. Forget about roller coasters. Even
heights in general.
Like everything scared me, So I through the Marines, I started to look for where's that next fear? What's the next inner battle I can confront with myself and go to war with myself to find something on the other side. And that's how it began. Obviously back then I wasn't as, conscious or self-aware as I am now as to what it all led to. I didn't know it would lead me to this path of Fearvana and what I do now, but that was the birth of it. And now it's, taken a whole new journey into ultra running and mountain climbing at a different level, polar exploration. In fact, just half an hour before we got on this call, I spoke with the team that later this year I'm skiing to the South Pole on 40 days on a South Pole expedition in Antarctica at minus 40 degrees and the brutality of conditions out there, so it terrifies me. I'm still nervous because I literally just got off that call half an hour ago, but that's what draws me to it,
So then, so going back, so you've got this terror. What sort of things do you use to overcome those feelings of terror in the
Great
moment?
question.
In that moment. So it's one thing that we can get the books and we can study, we can read, but in that exact moment, it's entirely different, whole new ball game, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's like at this point in my life, I'm very accustomed to the feeling. I've engaged it a lot. So now it's sort of normal to deal with it. I deal with it on a regular basis. But earlier on, some of the things I did. So if you're sort of new to facing that fear within, like I'll give you an example. When I went skydiving, I remember driving to the drop zone and I was actually hoping it would rain because I was that scared that I wanted an out, I wanted it's raining. So I don't have to go.
That's right.
So how in that moment when you face it, and I'll give you another really good example of this. So when I was rock climbing, I hadn't been rock climbing in a few years. And I went back out I wanted to get back into climbing. And I suddenly started feeling terrified, like the heights and all that kind of thing, started feeling terrified. First climb up the rock and I was roped up, like perfectly safe. I was roped up, but the fear showed up, And so I first climb, I was trying to fight the fear. I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like, stop being afraid. You've done this before. And sometimes you forget your own advice, and this was exactly what I should not be doing. The first climb, I was terrible. I was a mess up there. Second climb, like I was stumbling all over the rocks. Second climb, I came back and I'm like, oh yeah, remember your own advice? I'm like, instead of trying to fight the fear, instead of trying to resist the fear, instead of saying, stop being afraid, like, people say, don't be scared, be fearless. And how many times do we hear people say that? Sure, don't be scared, don't worry, don't stress. We always say, don't feel what you feel. Right. Instead of doing that, that's like the worst thing you can do. And I've experienced it firsthand, like as I mentioned, so instead of doing that, the second climb, I said, all right, you're afraid. Cool. I'm just going to notice it. I'm going to be with it. I'm going to feel its presence within me. I'm going to acknowledge its presence. Mm-hmm. So just say, okay, I'm feeling afraid right now. And actually neuroscience has shown when you label the emotion, it reduces activity in the emotional parts of the brain and increases activity in parts of the brain related to focus and awareness. Oh. So essentially what that does is it's allowing you to not be consumed by the emotion. Instead of reacting to the emotion, like, we often do, you get angry and you just react instead of, but if you pause, now you can respond to it. You can
channel it. Essentially, you're channeling it, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Gotcha. So I pause. Cool. I'm feeling afraid. Great. Let me breathe it in. Super powerful thing to do is just pause and breathe. Breathe it in deep. It's not going to make the fear go away, and don't expect it to go away. Now say, great. I'm scared. Let me use it. And that's what I did. The second climb, I was like graceful up that rock wall, and same thing, like anything, whether it be public speaking, and another way to view it is, and when I thought of public speaking, I remember this because a friend of mine, he was scared of public speaking, which is the most common fear there is. More people are scared of public speaking than death, so a lot of people would say, okay, how to get rid of that fear. And I said, look, when you reframe the fear and you start to see that fear is not the enemy of love, but fear is an expression of love. Why am I scared of rock climbing or public speaking? Because I love my message. I love that I want to help people, or I love my life. I don't want to die on the rock, So fear, when you start viewing fear as an expression of love, it helps you reframe your relationship to it. Oh, I'm scared because this matters to me. I was scared of writing a bad book because it mattered to me. Yeah. If I didn't care, I would have just put something out there, and who cares? I wouldn't be scared, Yeah. And I've gone through moments in my life where I wasn't scared of dying, and that wasn't healthy. Like today, I am terrified of dying. Sure. The things I do can literally can kill me. Yes. And I'm scared of that. So I use the fear to prepare, to make sure I'm as prepared as possible when I set foot on the mountain or when I'm speaking on a stage, because I love my life. I love the message. I love the people I want to serve. I use that fear to come as prepared as possible for the battle, whatever that battle may be.
Yeah, no. Well, and I know I touched earlier about, justified fears. Sometimes we have these fears. There's justified fears and fears that aren't real, right? And that's also time that we're also kind of battling too, things that, maybe a friend had an issue that created a fear for us, and now we're carrying it. It's got nothing to do with us. We've never experienced it before, but yet we're afraid to take this action. So, it's also important to make the distinction between the two fears, isn't it?
So I get what you're saying, and I totally respect it. But the way I like to view it is that there's actually I often say that there's no such thing as irrational fears. Okay. People will say there's an irrational fear, and I get it. I understand where they're coming from. Right. I understand where you're coming from. Right. But the reality is, we don't control most of what happens in our brain. Most of what happens in our brain is through our subconscious decides for us. So for example, right now I'm sitting in this room talking to you. If let's say somebody comes in here with a gun,
Yep.
I'm not going to choose to feel fear. I'm not going to pause and say, let me feel fear. My brain's going to respond with fear. Right. So the point that I'm making is when we demonize fears as irrational, we are assigning a judgment to that fear. So in the example you brought up, like something happened to my friend, right? Yep. And now I feel fear because something happened to him. Like that's perfectly normal because the brain says, this person I cared about, the subconscious is saying he went through this incident or he, she, whatever, like went through this incident, it hurt them. So it could happen to me. Gotcha. So inevitably it shows up with fear. So the key thing with fear is not to judge it when it shows up because it's going to show up how it shows up. We don't control most of how it shows up. What matters is what we do with it. Like I'll give you a great example of this. I was working with this client and he was traveling to Iceland on a vacation just to go, and he was going on his own and nothing like extreme, not some, death-defying trip, just going to Reykjavik, like comfortable, but going on his own. And he was terrified. And he was beating himself up because he was like looking at me who climbs mountains and does all these crazy things. And he's like, you do all these things. I'm going to Iceland, I'm alone and I'm scared. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I scared? And kind of beating himself up, judging it. Like there's something wrong with that fear. Yes. And the reason it showed up for him was because he had never done that before. So his brain perceived it as a risk. I used to be scared of many of the things that I'm now not scared of because not because I'm any braver, but because my brain has built up a different set of references that says, okay, you know what? Traveling to Iceland alone now wouldn't scare me because I've experienced things like that. So it's just that my brain has different references than his. It's not that we're any braver. What matters is what we do when that fear shows up. Yes. Like courage cannot exist unless there is fear. Mm-hmm. It takes no courage to sit on my couch watching a movie. It takes courage to do the thing that scares me. And however it shows up, for whoever it shows up, it may show up when you're traveling alone. It may show up when you're climbing a mountain. It may show up in different ways. That's okay. I mean, to this day, the other day I was sitting in New Jersey, where I used to live, and I live in a very nice area in New Jersey, like safe area. And I was alone. And suddenly fear showed up because I felt like this loneliness. Okay. And now every instance of this was absurd. I do ridiculously dangerous things. I've spent 7 days in darkness alone. I was going to ask you about that actually. Yeah, we'll get into that too. So the point that I'm making is like I've done a lot of crazy things. Sure. Why is fear suddenly showing up? Now, one part of you could easily say, like, easily judge it. What's wrong with me? Why is this fear showing up? Like, stop being scared. But again, as I said, at this point now, I'm very comfortable. I don't care when fear shows up. I'll say, okay, cool. Something in me felt fear right now. Awesome. Yeah. I'm going to be with it. I'm feeling a little lonely. Let me sit with it for a little bit. And I actually just meditated and it kind of dissipated, So when you sit with it and you be with it fully, it reduces the impact on you. And then you can now do something with it.
I love the point you made about having those reference points in our brains, right? It's like, you go through an experience and that oftentimes it is, as you pointed out, the difference maker between doing something and not doing something. It's like, wait a second, I've been here already. I've done it before. Yeah. Why can't I do it again? And I think we can apply that to all aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. And sometimes like doing things again, the fear might show up again. Sometimes it doesn't. And that's why like the key thing is just like there's value in sometimes understanding, okay, what's the fear? But especially in the moment of that battle, like whatever the thing you're facing, who cares that it's there? Like, I do not care when fear shows up. What matters to me is what I'm going to do with it, And as I said, now I'm very well trained in it. So even when I was climbing in Denali, there were days like as an example, we were climbing moving from 14,000 feet to the high camp at 17,000 feet. Wow. And we were told there was a ridge.
You say that so easily. Oh, 14,000. Oh my gosh.
And see, this is like, I say it because again, it's normalized
it's
for
a reference point, right?
It's a reference point.
Mine is like,
exactly.
I'm good, right?
And it's not like it's again, and I'm glad you pointed that out because it's not about better, worse, good, bad. Right. It's just different references. That's right. All it is, And so when we were making this climb, like we were told, I knew it was coming. You could see this ridge line where it's a super narrow ridge line. You're talking 1 foot in front of the other, and on each side is a 2,000-foot drop. Wow. And I knew that I would have to face this, and I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I hadn't climbed on there before, and I'm like, it's normal to be scared of that. And eventually I did it. I got to the climb. I made past that route. We got to high camp, but I was really okay that the fear showed up. And I'm still human. So some part of me sometimes will be like, there's nothing to be scared of. And then immediately I'll kind of remember my own advice. It's okay to be scared, even if it shows up, how it shows up, where it shows up, doesn't matter. Yeah. Now I gotta do something with it. And ultimately I was still scared when we got to that ridge line. I saw it in front of me. I knew what was coming and I was scared. And I said, okay, great. I'm going to move forward one step at a time. one step, 1 inch at a time. And when you're in that inch, like when I'm in that moment of, and this is a great thing, this is like actually a great example of Fearvana, that in the moment of Fearvana, the fear is now no longer there. So before the battle, the fear is there. But when I'm stepping on that ridgeline, there was no fear because I'm so consumed with that moment. I don't have to, like my brain is just purely in that moment.
Yep.
My whole world is that one step. I have to make sure I'm hitting my foot on that step, and that's my world. So in that moment, fear doesn't exist because you're in Fearvana. It's like the beauty of that is you're so present, you know, and the presence of that is like, it's blissful. It's absolute heavenly. I mean, that's why I keep doing these things.
Yeah, I give you a lot of credit, actually. I mean, I'm listening to you going, oh boy, you know, I get you.
Oh, it was terrifying.
I get it. I mean, again, I kind of think that sometimes if the fear doesn't appear, then, you know, you have to look at that. Is that like that? It's normal because you said it's normal, right? Like, if fear doesn't happen, then you got to question that too, I think.
In war, we used to say that if somebody's not scared, they're either insane or they're lying. Wow. You know, because you don't want someone who's not scared. In these sports that I do, fear builds a healthy amount of respect for the endeavor. Yeah. If you're not scared when you're doing some of these things, you're either insane or you're lying or there's something wrong. Like I wouldn't want to go do some of these things with people who are not scared because that fear breeds respect. Yes. It breeds respect for the mountain, respect for the craft. Understood. When you go to war, it breeds respect for the endeavor that, you know, okay, this thing could kill me. It could hurt other people around me. And again, in these contexts, I'm talking life and death fears, but again, it's other fears as well, right? Fear of looking stupid. These are all real fears. So the point is that it's there, you know, and it's not about judging it. And if it's not there, it's, you know, especially in life or death scenarios, there's something wrong. And in other cases, again, maybe it doesn't show up because your brain has more references, you know? Sure. So that's it shows up where it shows up, but especially life and death, like in war, like I said, you want it, the healthy amount of fear is very important.
Understood. I think an important point in this, and I know we've touched on it briefly before, but you know, we're talking about life and death situations, but it can apply to all aspects of our lives. Because fear is fear, right? It comes back to us individually, but in all aspects of our lives, regardless who we are, what we're doing, fear can appear itself in any way, shape, or form.
Very much so. And it's very connected to our evolutionary brain. So our brain is designed for archaic world when we were still kind of tribal creatures and cavemen, cavewomen like creatures, you know? So like an example of coming back to the example of public speaking, you know, we fear it because evolutionary speaking, if you were rejected from a tribe, it meant death. Gotcha. If you were alone in the wilderness, basically it meant death. So fear of looking bad is kind of rooted in this evolutionary construct of being rejected by the tribe, you know, and that's a valid fear. It's an evolutionary fear that's bred from, like, if I, let's say, look really stupid on a public speaking stage, I'm not going to die, but that's evolutionary. That's kind of where it comes from. And it feels bad to look if I screw up and everybody, you know, judges me. That's a valid fear. It's gonna feel bad, and then use that fear to prepare. Like that's why when I'm scared before a big talk or something, I will prepare, and that's how I crush the speech because fear propels you to prepare.
That's right. Yeah. Try telling someone who bombs on a speech that is no big deal in that moment.
Yeah,
it is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
And they'll equate it to death, right? Because it feels that powerful.
Exactly.
So it's real.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a big thing that we do a lot, but it's not healthy to do. And this is, I think, really good message for parents as well is, you know, like stop telling people not to feel what they feel. You know, we always do that. Like you said, the example of somebody coming off a speech and they might be feeling really down. Oh, don't feel sad. It's okay. No, feel it. Cool. You're feeling sad. You're feeling grief. You're we do this all the time. Don't worry. Don't stress. Don't feel sad. Don't be scared. Feel it. Feel what you feel, embrace the feeling, acknowledge the feeling, own that feeling. Then you can channel it. Like if something bad happens in life, it's normal to feel sad. It's normal to feel grief. Right. We don't want to lose the power of that emotion. Happiness only exists because there is sadness, you know? We need contrast to truly appreciate the breadth and depth of this grand human experience. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that you, as you were talking, you've referenced a couple of times, and I want to go zero in on that, is the importance of self-talk and the things that we say to ourselves in these moments. And I think oftentimes the things that we say to ourselves is a difference maker between whether we embrace it or not, isn't it?
100%. Yeah. That self-talk, that self-dialogue, it is always happening in our mind. And if we don't bring it to the surface, if we're not choosing consciously what's happening, it's going to be chosen for us. Yeah. And so it is so important to bring that to the consciousness. Like one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite psychologists, Carl Jung, he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Okay.
Make that unconscious conscious, because if you don't, it's going to direct your life. So that self-talk, and it is relentless. Like you have to be relentless about training it, because if you don't, it's the brain's naturally lazy. It's going to retreat to the laziest and easiest course of action. Because again, coming back to the evolutionary concept of the brain, it doesn't care how happy you are. It cares about your survival. And so survival, like evolutionary speaking, survival wise, we need to conserve energy for what we need only to live. So energy, like the brain wants to save energy. It constantly is going to retreat to the laziest and easiest course of action. So you have to transcend that constantly. And that is why it's so important to choose how you're talking to yourself, because in time it can become habitual, but otherwise you're just going to retreat to those, the darkness, the demons that plague us, they're going to rise to the surface. So you have to talk, and like a great strategy is to actually talk out loud to yourself. If there were cameras watching me when I'm going around my house, I would look like an insane person, because I'm talking, like even when I'm running, I'll be whispering to myself, mumbling to myself. Like I look like I'm out of my mind, but I'm having a dialogue with myself to build myself into who I want to be. And you have to be so ruthless and like relentless about it, how you keep talking to yourself and keep choosing that. Like, okay, if a pattern that doesn't serve you shows up, you have to keep choosing outside of it and keep choosing to transcend it, to choose something beyond it.
Gotcha. I can hear it. You are awesome. You are worthy. You are great. Like these are sorts of things that we can tell ourselves and really, whether they pump ourselves up or make ourselves feel better, whatever that is, but it's an important dialogue and a very, very important dialogue to have. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Mm-hmm.
The darkness. Let's get into the darkness here. You're sitting in the dark. 70 days?
7 days.
7 days. 7 days. Wow.
7 full days. Yeah. 24.
So give me the background on that, because
Sure.
So I'm assuming that darkness is something that's a fear for you. Is that kind of how that came to be, or is there another aspect?
It wasn't as much the darkness as it was stillness. Being still is, I would say it's a fear. I would say, in my experience of myself and just in a lot of work I've done, engaging with a lot of people and studying human psychology, it's arguably one of the greatest human fears. It's not a fear people would acknowledge. Like if I ask you what's your greatest fear, 99% of people wouldn't say stillness, but it's a fear that we have. And that's why like we are so distracted from ourselves, right? We constantly distract ourselves from being another great quote. Was that from Carl? Yeah, Carl Jung again. Carl Jung, one of my favorite psychologists. He said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid confronting their own soul. Like we will drink, we will watch TV, we will stay on our phone, we'll go on laptops. We will do anything to avoid stillness. I mean, just like travel on the train or go on the plane. Like I was just on a plane flying to India, and you'll see people they'll take out, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. It's guilty of it from time to time myself. Sure. Pull out the phone, scroll through for an email, no email, put it down. 2 minutes later, scroll through on the phone. What's the newest thing on Instagram? Put it down, because we can't be still with ourselves, right? Yeah. So I was facing that, and part of I mean, it's human. Again, it's human. I do it from time to time, and then I have to notice it and bring it back, right? Yep. So it is very human to do this. So it's not a judgment. It's just a reality that we have this fear of being still, because when we are still, we have to confront our own soul. We have to confront our own thoughts, and that is incredibly freaking hard to face that. So I wanted to face that. I wanted to, like I usually do with facing my fears, and part of also what drew me to it is I had gone through a very challenging divorce, and I ended up breaking my sobriety. Okay. And I didn't like that about myself. Like everything I do, when I do it hard. So when I drank hard. We're talking like bottles a day. And so I didn't like going down that path again. So I knew I needed to find something else within to seek some answers. And so I was going to go to a silent retreat, which is much more popular. I don't know if you've heard of these Vipassanas. No. They're these 10-day silent retreats that are a little more common than darkness retreats. So I had heard about this thing. And as I was doing some research, I stumbled into a darkness retreat. So I was super curious. And me being me, I was inevitably going to pursue the most extreme path I could possibly find to confront stillness, And the value in the darkness is, unlike, let's say, a silent retreat where you're silent for 10 days and meditating, kind of doing this, like there's a whole program around the silent retreats, is in darkness, you're shutting off your visual sense. Yes. So in a silent retreat, you're silent, but you're still seeing the world. So my mind has somewhere external to go. I can look at a wall and say, that's a wall, that's a door. So my mind has someone external to have a conversation with. My consciousness can go outside of itself. In darkness, you have nowhere to go because you can't see anything. You're shutting off one of the primary ways in which we engage with the world. Therefore, you are forced to go within. And that journey is daunting, it's arduous, it's terrifying, but it is also extremely beautiful. And so it was 7 days, 24/7, like literally can't see your hand in front of you, darkness, pure darkness. And part of the reason is you do it in that extreme darkness is because theoretically you could sort of sit in your room and, and turn off the lights, but there's still ambient light. And you want to, so you can practice stillness in normal setting, but going to a darkness retreat by experiencing darkness at that intensity where you literally cannot see your hand in front of you for that extended period of time, your brain naturally starts to release DMT. DMT is one of the primary ingredients in ayahuasca. So you essentially go through, you hallucinate, you see lights, you go through these very intense hallucinogenic type experiences. Like, for example, 5 days into the darkness retreat, I saw the brightest white light I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm in a pitch dark room and I see this bright, blinding white light. I mean, I was literally going like this, like covering my eyes. I was touching my eyelids because I couldn't tell if they were open or closed. And it was a blinding white light. And that was one of many such profound experiences in the darkness.
So you're literally hallucinating, literally.
Yeah. Wow. You're seeing these lights. I mean, from day 2, lights were a constant presence with me. Like, and I can't explain why these colors, but like day 2, I would see purple lights kind of moving like a lava lamp. And then for whatever reason, which again, I cannot explain, day 3 to day 4, somewhere in that time frame, the purple disappeared and I only started seeing red and green lights. And it was kind of like red, mostly like like not so much like a lava lamp, but sort of this expanse of light. And it's profound. And I was also journaling in the dark. So I a lot of stuff showed up within about like my, like answering, like not saying my answers are right answers, but answering questions that satisfied me about very deep questions about like the nature of God, the nature of enlightenment. Why are we here? These kind of deep existential questions about the human experience that I had been pondering. And I found some profound answers to that. Again, not to say my answers are right, because I don't think some of these things, there are no right answers, but we all have our own experience of what God is and what enlightenment means. And I found answers that satisfied me and brought me to a newer place.
You go through your own sort of realization, and it's going to be different for everyone, right? Exactly. And that's what I'm hearing.
Exactly. And I also processed a lot of stuff about what some of the darkness was still within me. Like I still struggled a lot with this guilt of, I've seen a lot of pain in the world. I've worked with former child soldiers to survivors of sex trafficking. I've been in war, volunteered in leper colonies, volunteered in places with extreme poverty. And I've always had this sort of, why me? Why do I get to live a good life when as we sit here, I mean, right now, as you and me are having this conversation, there are people in the darkest corners of hell suffering more than we can possibly fathom. Right. And a lot of stuff showed up within me about confronting this sense of, guilt about my place on the planet and what that means and how do I face it? How do I transcend it? And that was part of the reason that I had gone back into those dark places, because I've always, if you're always miserable at the core of your soul, it's very easy to get trapped into the addiction because you're miserable. Your life is dark, constantly. And so it allowed me to channel some of that, like to move through some of that stuff and find, a deeper sense of peace and joy in the human experience, and therefore, inevitably you don't have, when you're in a place of greater joy and peace, you don't need to drink yourself stupid. Right. So,
right. I heard you talk about embracing the darkness and that very much is in line with that. So, getting comfortable with it really is what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Getting comfortable embracing it much like you would with fear. So that's, I get it. Wow. That's powerful stuff, man. That really is powerful stuff.
It was a profound journey, and and darkness in every sense. Like I mentioned, like I'd gone to war with the Marines when I lost a friend in the war, struggled with survivor's guilt, and that darkness. I mean, it's the same thing about embracing the darkness of that. Like for a long time, I had a picture of my friend that I lost in the war up on my wall, and it said, "This should have been you. Earn this life." And my guilt became my fuel. It didn't go away to this day. I mean, it's not as powerful in terms of it's not all consuming, but it shows up from time to time. And but I use it. I work with it. I've learned to channel it into something beautiful,
When this conversation is long and done, I reflect back on it. One of the themes that's going to come to my mind, and I can tell because it's percolating now, the whole idea of just using what you've got and not running from it. Like it's so important. And again, we're embracing it very much so and harnessing it and helping us use that to propel to go in different directions. And why that's so significant, I think, for this podcast, because we talk a lot about audacity and being audacious and living that audacious lifestyle, and so much of that is tied into using these things to propel us where we need to go.
Absolutely. Everybody's going to confront their own demons at some point in life. Everybody suffers one way or the other. You could have a
Yeah.
$0 or $1 billion. Everybody's going to suffer. And of learning to work with that, learning to channel that, that's what's going to give you that greater sense of peace, that greater sense of joy about moving through the human condition in a more audacious way. I mean, that's how you become more bold in confronting yourself. Is you have to go one more Carl Jung quote, which is, again, I quote him a lot because him and Viktor Frankl are my two favorite psychologists. And Carl Jung says that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So we all have that darkness within us. And if you avoid it, it's going to run your life. It's going to run your life without you knowing it. But if you confront it, if you face it, if you work with it, if you use it, now it becomes a part of you. Then you start to recognize, like in a very visceral way, I had mentioned in the darkness retreat, darkness and light coexisted. I was in a pitch dark room and I'm seeing lights. And that's not just a literal thing. That's figurative and metaphorical as well. Like the darkness and light within ourselves can coexist. The demons we face, they can coexist with the divinity within. They're not one or the other. They can work together to enhance our journey. And in fact, not just can work together, they must work together, because if you don't, they will consume your soul in a destructive way. Yeah. And so you want to bring them to the surface so you can use them and channel them with the light to live a more meaningful, purposeful, fulfilling life.
And they can coexist. It's not one independent of they can coexist one another. And
absolutely.
And what you're saying is they're meant to. They're part of one another, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Actually, this has been really, really great, man. I've so appreciated the conversation, the enlightenment, the perspectives have been awesome. So I do want to ask you one more question before we go. And for listeners who are taking in what we're talking about and hearing you and really absorbing this, what would you suggest as a first step and as how you embrace fear, or the steps can be taken if someone will go, okay, I hear you. What do I do first? What does that look like?
Yeah. A great way to engage it is arguably the most powerful is through exercise, through physical suffering. And one neuroscientist says he calls exercise miracle grow for the brain. Okay. Another neuroscientist said that if they could put the effects of exercise into a pill, it'd be the best-selling pill of all time. Wow. So exercise, why it's so valuable in confronting your fears and confronting pain, it teaches you how to suffer. When you go through, and it'll teach you to confront your fears. Like, I feel scared before I know I have, like when I did a 24-hour run a few months, a little while ago, I was terrified before doing it. I knew it would suck. I knew I would suffer. So it faces fear. You face suffering. You go into spaces within yourself that you cannot go unless you have confronted that fear and suffering. So for anybody listening, the first way to face it is, and you can do literally anything. If there's to face fear, you can go up to a man or a woman in a bar to talk to them. That's scary, sure. Whatever the thing is, find a way to do things that are scary, because that's the only way you're going to build confidence. Confidence comes on the other side of those fears when you face them, right? But exercise is the most powerful because it'll push you into places within yourself you've never been. You got to experience moments in life where you go to war with yourself. Gotcha. And one part of you is going to want to quit and the other is going to fight. Right. When you are in that moment where you're in a battle with yourself, that moment will teach you more about yourself than you could possibly know. And so the inherent nature of that moment is it's going to be hard. There's going to be nothing easy about it. So don't expect it to be easy. Right. It's going to suck. You're going to suffer. You're going to hate life. And when I do 24-hour runs, there was moments where I'm sitting there just miserable, being like, why the hell am I doing this? This fucking
whose
sucks,
idea was this?
Yeah, this is the worst thing ever. But I come out of it and I'm planning the next one. You know what I mean? So the key is when you go into those moments, you're going to discover something so profound within yourself. And exercise is a beautiful way to confront that, to go to war with yourself and find, it's only through that war that you'll find peace.
Got you. That's awesome. Actually, I heard you use the term the worthy struggle, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. Find these worthy struggles and use that. Again, we're talking about harnessing and channeling, but that really is the key in all this. So certainly, like I said, that message is rung through loud and clear. Thank you for sharing that. For anyone that want to know more about you, your work, your book, or the marathons you're on, the rock climbing, mountain climbing you're doing, where can they go and find out more about that?
Yeah, you can follow along with the adventures on Fearvana at Instagram. Instagram is Fearvana, or fearvana.com. And the book is available on Amazon in Kindle, Audible, paperback. 100% of the proceeds of the book go to charity. We support some beautiful causes. So you could find the book where we elaborate more into the depths of what Fearvana is and how to use it in your own journey.
Amazing stuff. Akshay, again, thank you for this.
Thank you so much, my friend. Pleasure to be.
Very appreciate this, and be well.
Thank you. You too.
Back we are here on the podcast, and big shout out and thanks goes out to Akshay for joining me here on the Audacious Living podcast. Your insights are fascinating, both practical, straightforward. I really appreciate the manner in which you changed our viewpoint when it comes to fear and how we respond to it, and suffering and pain, and really how to turn them into bliss. Akshay left us with so much to think about. But if there's just one thing that I would take from our conversation, it would be this. As uneasy and nerve-wracking as they may be, feelings of fear, stress, and anxiety are all normal aspects of the human existence. These uneasy and oftentimes uncomfortable experiences get a bad rap because they're perceived as negative or a bad thing when they surface. However, at the end of the day, these feelings are completely normal, and in some cases are to be expected. A key point that's often overlooked is when these feelings are properly harnessed, they can serve as an incredible source of strength and motivation to overcome virtually any situation. They can keep us alert and aware of our surroundings, and ultimately can be the factors to help us accomplish our goals, our dreams, and our wishes. Essentially, use the fear and don't let the fear use you. Hey, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, do know that you can do so simply by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com, and all you've got to do is enter in your email address, and you'll be immediately connected every time and alerted every time there's new content that comes out. So it's that easy. We've reached the end and have come to the end of another episode of the Audacious Living podcast, and I take this opportunity to thank our listeners and thank our Audacious community for the support, the ongoing support. It's fantastic. All those lovers of audaciousness, I appreciate you each and every week that you come out and support the podcast, and I encourage you to continue that going, and we will do our same here. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.